At 78 years old, Eleanor believed she had already lived through everything life could throw at a woman. She had buried her husband, endured loneliness, and learned how silence could replace arguments. But nothing prepared her for what she saw when she opened her bedroom door that afternoon. A golden retriever was sprawled across her bed, snoring softly, while her pillow lay on the floor like it no longer belonged to her. Her heart tightened as she stood frozen in the doorway, gripping the frame to steady herself. This had been her sanctuary for nearly 4 decades, and now it felt unfamiliar. She realized in that moment that something precious had already been taken from her. Michael stood near the window with his arms folded, watching her reaction without moving. "Mom, Daisy needs a softer place to sleep," he said calmly, as if explaining a simple household rule. Eleanor swallowed hard and looked from the dog to her son, searching his face for hesitation, for shame, for anything. "That's my bed," she said quietly, her voice thinner than she intended. Michael sighed, rubbing his forehead. "She's old, Mom. She deserves comfort." Eleanor nodded slowly, realizing he had already decided whose comfort mattered more. Sharon leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone, her tone casual when she finally spoke. "We moved your things into the laundry room," she said without looking up. "It's closer to the bathroom. Safer for you." The word safer wrapped around Eleanor's chest like a rope. She glanced at the dresser she and her late husband had bought together years ago, now pushed aside to make room for a dog bed still half unpacked. Her memories had been relocated without permission. She wanted to speak, but the words refused to rise. Eleanor turned away and walked down the hallway that no longer felt like hers. The laughter from the living room followed her, light and careless, as if nothing had changed. When she opened the laundry room door, a narrow folding cot greeted her, pressed against the washing machine. There was no blanket, no pillow, just cold metal and the smell of detergent. She stood there for a long moment, understanding something painful but undeniable. They had not just moved into her house. They had moved her out of it. As Eleanor sat slowly on the cot, a strange calm settled over her, deeper than sadness and sharper than anger. For months, she had told herself this arrangement was temporary, that kindness required patience and sacrifice. But this was different. This was not need, it was entitlement. She looked at the closed door and felt something shift inside her chest, something steady and unyielding. "I will not sleep here," she whispered to herself. And for the first time in years, Eleanor felt clarity instead of fear. Eleanor did not sleep that night. She lay on the narrow cot listening to the soft hum of the washing machine and the distant sounds of laughter drifting down the hallway. Every noise reminded her that the house no longer moved around her rhythm. She stared at the ceiling and thought about how it had started, not with cruelty, but with requests. "Just a few weeks, Mom," Michael had said months ago, standing in her kitchen with that careful smile. She had agreed without hesitation, because mothers rarely ask for proof when love is involved. Lying there now, Eleanor understood how easily kindness could be mistaken for permission. The next morning, Eleanor moved through the house quietly, as she had learned to do. Sharon was already reorganizing the kitchen, shifting items Eleanor used every day to shelves she could no longer reach. "This makes more sense," Sharon said when Eleanor paused. "It's more efficient." Eleanor nodded, though nothing felt efficient about losing your place inch by inch. Michael rushed past with his phone pressed to his ear, barely noticing her presence. She realized then that she had become background noise in the life she once centered. Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat in the laundry room folding towels, a task no one had asked her to do but everyone expected. Daisy padded in quietly and rested her chin on Eleanor's knee. Eleanor smiled faintly and stroked the dog's ear. "At least you remember me," she whispered. The door creaked open and Michael's voice followed. "Daisy, leave Grandma alone. She needs rest." The words landed harder than he intended. Eleanor looked down at her hands and wondered when her existence had become a liability. That evening, Sharon announced dinner plans without looking at Eleanor. "We're ordering out," she said. "It's easier." Eleanor ate a small bowl of leftovers alone while the others laughed around the table. Their conversation flowed over her like water over stone, never stopping, never settling. She tried to remember the last time someone had asked her opinion about anything that mattered. The answer came too quickly. There hadn't been one. As Eleanor washed her dish and dried it carefully, a thought formed with unexpected clarity. They had taken her room, her routine, her voice, but not her ownership. The house still carried her name on every legal paper, a fact no one seemed to remember anymore. She returned to the laundry room and sat on the cot, breathing slowly. This was not anger rising in her chest. It was resolve. They believed she had nowhere to go, no strength left to use. Eleanor closed her eyes and allowed herself a small, steady smile. They were wrong. The next day, Eleanor opened the small metal lockbox she had not touched since George passed away. Inside were papers he once explained patiently, line by line, making sure she understood everything. She ran her fingers over the deed, her name printed clearly, firmly, without question. For months she had forgotten this truth, letting silence blur reality. "You were always careful," she whispered, imagining George's calm voice beside her. The realization settled deep in her chest, steady and grounding. This house had not stopped being hers, just because she had been quiet. That afternoon, Michael complained about bills at the kitchen table, his voice sharp with stress. "Things are tight again," he said, glancing at Eleanor without really seeing her. Sharon added items to an online shopping cart while nodding absently. "We'll need help this month," she said casually, as if discussing groceries. Eleanor watched them both, noticing how natural it felt for them to expect her support. For the first time, she didn't nod. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. "Mom," Michael finally said, confused by her lack of response. Eleanor met his eyes calmly. "I'm thinking," she replied. Sharon scoffed lightly and returned to her phone, already bored. But Eleanor's thoughts were no longer tangled in guilt. She was remembering every check she had written, every bill quietly placed near her teacup. What once felt like love now looked unmistakably like entitlement. And clarity, once found, does not loosen its grip easily. That night, Eleanor sat on the cot and wrote a list, slow and deliberate. It wasn't a list of complaints, but of facts. The house was hers. The bills were hers. The silence had been hers, too. Daisy lay beside her on the floor, watching her write with gentle eyes. "I should have spoken sooner," Eleanor murmured, stroking the dog's head. But regret no longer ruled her. Preparation had taken its place. 2 days later, Eleanor called a lawyer whose name George had circled years ago in an old notebook. The woman's voice on the phone was calm and respectful. "I want my home back," Eleanor said simply. There was no drama in her tone, no anger to justify. Just truth. The lawyer paused briefly, then replied, "We can help you with that." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling something unlock inside her chest. At the office, Eleanor sat upright, her lockbox resting on her lap. The lawyer reviewed each document carefully, nodding as she went. "You are the sole owner," she confirmed. "You have every legal right." The words felt unreal and powerful all at once. Eleanor signed where she was told, her hand steady, her breath calm. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she had misplaced. When Eleanor returned home, the house sounded louder than usual, filled with complaints and distractions. Sharon was arguing on the phone, Michael pacing near the window. No one noticed Eleanor walk past them. She went straight to the laundry room and placed the papers back into the lockbox. She sat on the cot and allowed herself a long, quiet breath. The storm was no longer inside her. It was waiting outside. That evening, Sharon announced changes to the living room furniture, waving her hand dismissively. "We'll move things around tomorrow," she said. Eleanor listened without reacting. Michael glanced at her briefly, then looked away. They mistook her calm for surrender. But calm can also be certainty, sharpened and prepared. Eleanor smiled faintly, knowing something they did not. Later, Daisy followed Eleanor down the hallway, nails clicking softly against the floor. Eleanor knelt with effort and rested her forehead against the dog's warm fur. "You didn't do this," she whispered. Daisy wagged her tail once, as if agreeing. The moment grounded her, reminding her what loyalty looked like. Even the dog knew where she belonged. That night, Eleanor placed the lockbox beside her cot and turned off the light. She no longer felt small in the dark. The path ahead was clear, measured, unavoidable. Soon, conversations would change, and consequences would arrive quietly, wrapped in paper instead of shouting. Eleanor closed her eyes with a sense of calm she had not felt in years. This was not the end yet, but it was the beginning of taking everything back. The next morning arrived quietly, almost respectfully, as if the house itself sensed what was coming. Eleanor woke before anyone else and moved through the hallway with a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. She made tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam rise slowly. When Michael entered, he barely acknowledged her, reaching instead for his phone. "We're going to need help again this month," he said absently. Eleanor looked at him and replied calmly, "That won't be happening." His hand froze mid-motion, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean?" Michael asked, finally looking at her directly. Eleanor folded her hands neatly on the table. "I mean I'm done paying for things I don't control," she said. Sharon walked in just in time to hear it and laughed sharply. "Oh please, Eleanor, don't start being dramatic now." Eleanor didn't raise her voice or argue. "This isn't drama," she said. "This is me being clear." The room went quiet in a way that made Sharon uncomfortable. For the rest of the day, the house felt tense, like a held breath. Sharon slammed cabinets louder than necessary, and Michael avoided Eleanor completely. Daisy stayed close to Eleanor's side, sensing the shift. That evening, Eleanor returned to the laundry room and opened the lockbox again. She reread the documents, not because she doubted them, but because she needed to remember her resolve. Tomorrow, she decided, things would change officially. Eleanor woke early again and dressed carefully, choosing a sweater George once said made her look strong. She placed the envelopes on the kitchen table, one for Michael and one for Sharon. When they came downstairs, sleepy and irritated, Michael reached for the papers automatically. His eyes scanned the first page, and his face drained of color. "Mom," he said slowly, "what is this?" Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "It's notice," she replied. "You have 30 days to move out." Sharon snatched the paper from Michael's hand, reading faster, angrier. "You can't do this," she snapped. "This is our home." Eleanor stood slowly, her joints protesting but her voice steady. "No," she said, "this is my home. You've been living in it." Michael rubbed his face, panic creeping into his expression. "Mom, let's talk about this," he pleaded. Eleanor shook her head gently. "I tried talking. You didn't listen." The argument that followed was loud, messy, and overdue. Sharon accused Eleanor of betrayal, of cruelty, of abandoning family. Michael paced, torn between anger and guilt. Eleanor listened without interruption, without apology. "I gave you everything I could," she said when they finally stopped. "But I will not disappear so you can be comfortable." Her words landed heavily, undeniable. Even Sharon had no immediate response. The children appeared at the doorway, confused by the raised voices. Eleanor softened then, kneeling slightly despite the ache in her knees. "You'll be okay," she told them gently. "This isn't your fault." Sharon ushered them away quickly, unwilling to let the moment linger. Michael stared at the papers again, as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves. They didn't. Over the next few days, the house filled with restless energy. Boxes appeared. Phone calls were whispered behind closed doors. Sharon moved sharply through rooms that were no longer hers to command. Michael grew quieter, more withdrawn, as realization set in. Eleanor stayed calm, focused, and unmoved. For once, she was not adjusting herself to their emotions. One evening, Michael approached Eleanor while she sat on the porch with Daisy. "I didn't realize how far we pushed you," he admitted quietly. Eleanor nodded. "That's the problem," she replied. "You never looked." He swallowed hard, shame flickering across his face. "I'm sorry," he said, not as a defense, but as truth. Eleanor accepted the words without reaching for comfort. As the days passed, Eleanor began reclaiming her home piece by piece. She moved her belongings back into her bedroom and folded her clothes into the dresser she shared with George. The laundry room emptied, slowly losing its meaning as exile. Each small restoration brought her peace, not triumph. The ending was approaching, and Eleanor felt ready. This was no longer about eviction. It was about returning to herself. The house grew quieter with each passing day, as if it were slowly remembering how to belong to Eleanor again. Sharon packed aggressively, muttering under her breath, while Michael moved more carefully, touching door frames and walls like a man saying goodbye too late. Eleanor did not interfere. She cooked her simple meals, walked Daisy in the mornings, and slept once again in her own bed. Each night, she rested a little easier, not because the pain was gone, but because her place in the world was no longer in question. One afternoon, Eleanor found Sharon standing in the bedroom doorway, staring at the space where the dog bed had once been. "I never thought you'd actually do it," Sharon said quietly. Eleanor smoothed the quilt and replied, "Neither did I once." Sharon scoffed, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. "Families don't do this to each other." Eleanor turned calmly. "Families don't erase each other either." Sharon had no answer for that. Michael avoided the house as much as possible, leaving early and returning late. When he did speak, his voice carried a restraint Eleanor hadn't heard before. "I keep thinking about Dad," he admitted one evening. Eleanor looked at him gently. "Your father believed in accountability," she said. "Even when it hurt." Michael nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that truth. For the first time, Eleanor felt she was speaking to an adult, not a child who expected forgiveness without reflection. The children began asking questions Eleanor knew Sharon couldn't fully answer. "Why are we leaving Grandma's house?" the youngest asked. Eleanor knelt carefully and smiled. "Because everyone needs their own space to grow," she said. "Even grown-ups." The child nodded, satisfied in a way adults rarely are. Eleanor watched them walk away and felt no bitterness, only quiet hope that they might learn earlier what their parents had not. As boxes stacked near the front door, Eleanor started restoring the house the way she remembered it. She rehung old photographs, brought her sewing basket back into the den, and replaced the lavender oil in its usual spot. The house responded with familiarity, creaking and settling as if grateful. These were small acts, but they felt monumental. She was not redecorating. She was reclaiming memory. One evening, Michael approached Eleanor with a spare key in his hand. He didn't offer it right away. "I should have protected you," he said quietly. Eleanor studied his face, older now, heavier with understanding. "You should have seen me," she replied. After a pause, he placed the key in her palm. The metal felt cool and final. This time, there was no argument, no confusion. Only acceptance. Sharon left last, her posture stiff, her pride doing the talking for her. She didn't say goodbye, but she paused at the door longer than Eleanor expected. "I hope you don't regret this," Sharon said. Eleanor met her gaze evenly. "I regret waiting," she answered. Sharon exhaled sharply and walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft, ordinary sound that felt anything but ordinary. When the house finally emptied, Eleanor stood alone in the living room and listened. There was no echo of shouting, no hurried footsteps, no tension clinging to the walls. Just stillness. Daisy padded over and sat beside her, tail wagging slowly. Eleanor smiled and lowered herself onto the couch. For the first time in months, she felt the house breathe with her, not against her. That night, Eleanor cooked a small meal and ate at the table without distraction. She washed the dishes at her own pace and left one cup drying by the sink, exactly where she liked it. She walked through each room before bed, turning off lights, touching door frames, acknowledging what she had protected. This was not loneliness. This was peace earned through courage. In her bedroom, Eleanor lay beside Daisy and stared at the ceiling she knew so well. She thought of George and smiled softly. "I didn't disappear," she whispered into the quiet. The words felt true, solid, complete. Sleep came easily, without fear or resentment. The house held her gently, as it always had when she remembered herself. Days later, Eleanor sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, painting the sky in warm colors. Neighbors waved, and she waved back, feeling present again in the world. She understood now that love without boundaries becomes surrender, and surrender slowly erases a person. She had learned that lesson late, but not too late. Her life still belonged to her. If anyone had asked Eleanor what changed, she wouldn't have said the eviction or the arguments. She would have said the moment she chose herself without apology. Age had not weakened her, it had clarified her. She rose from the porch chair with steady strength, ready to live the years ahead on her own terms. And for the first time in a long while, Eleanor walked back into her home knowing she truly belonged there.